London, 1815. The rain does not care who it falls on. It falls on the lords in their carriages. It falls on the merchants hurrying through Belgrave Square. And it falls on the young woman on her knees at the front steps of Baron Thorne's grand estate, scrubbing stone that will only need scrubbing again tomorrow. Her dress is thin. Her hands are red. And not a single person passing that gate stops to notice her. Because that is the rule of this world. Servants are not seen. They are used. Then the carriage comes. Too fast. Too close. The wheels catch the puddle at the edge of the pavement and the mud goes everywhere. Her dress, her face, her already raw hands. The carriage stops. A young lord steps out. Lord Phineas Ashford, second son of the Earl of Wiltshire. A man whose only real achievement is the family he was born into. He looks at her, and he laughs. Not a short laugh. Not a quiet one. The long, easy kind. The laugh of a man who has never once considered that the person in front of him might have a name, a history, a life that extends beyond the steps she is kneeling on. He reaches into his coat, pulls out a single copper coin, and he drops it, not places it, drops it, into the dirt at her feet. "Careful, girl," he says. "Some are born to rule. Others are born to clean up after them." She picks up the coin. Slowly. Her face does not change. There is no fire in her eyes. No tears. Just a stillness, deep and unreadable, like a river that looks calm because everything is happening underneath. What Lord Ashford cannot see, what none of them have ever thought to look for, is what lies beneath the high collar of her dress. A birthmark, small, shaped like a crested seal. The mark of a royal house that the world believes no longer exists. Her name is Carmen, and every single person in that square who looked through her this morning is about to spend the rest of their lives wishing they had paid closer attention. Stay with me, because this story is not about a girl who was saved. It is about a girl who was always ready and simply waited for the room to catch up. This story is entirely fiction. Any resemblance to real persons, living or otherwise, or to real places, is purely coincidental and unintended. But before this story goes any further, drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We have viewers joining from the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, Canada, Spain, Italy, Holland, Mexico, and all over the world. And we would genuinely love to know where you are. If you are new to this channel, subscribe now. I drop stories like this one regularly. Stories that are powerful, stories that teach something real, stories you will think about long after the video ends. Your support is what makes every one of these possible. Without you, there is no story. This channel is built on persistence. Subscribe if you believe in persistence. Before we go on, have you ever been underestimated by someone who later had to take it back? Tell us in the comments. You might be surprised how many people feel exactly the same way. Now, before we go any further into what happened at that ball, before we get to the moment that silenced an entire room full of lords and ladies, you need to understand who Carmen really is. Because the story only hits the way it should when you know exactly what she carried, and for how long she carried it alone. Carmen has worked at Baron Thorne's London estate for 7 years. 7 years of cold mornings. 7 years of stone floors and ash bins and trays that are never light enough. 7 years of moving through grand hallways without making a sound. Because that is what is expected. That is what is required. In the world of the English aristocracy in 1815, there existed a rigid social order known as the ton. Now here is something your history teacher most likely never told you. The word ton, spelled T-O-N, was borrowed from the French phrase le bon ton. It means good form or good taste. And in Regency England, it was not simply a description of polite society. It was a system, a hierarchy so precise and so enforced that it governed everything. Who you spoke to, who you married, which events you attended, and most importantly, who you were permitted to see at all. Servants were not part of the ton. They were beneath it. So far beneath it that acknowledging a servant in public was considered a breach of propriety. The grand estates of London were built with hidden corridors, narrow passages running behind the main walls, specifically so that domestic staff could move through the house without ever crossing the path of their employers or their guests. They were designed to be invisible, and Carmen had spent 7 years mastering that invisibility. But here is what they did not know. Here is what nobody in that house thought to consider. Every night, after the fires were banked and the kitchen had gone quiet, Carmen lit a single candle, and she read discarded newspapers from Baron Thorne's study, old letters left on the kitchen table, ledgers thrown into the ash bin, anything with words on it. She taught herself, quietly, relentlessly, entirely alone, because she understood something that the ton never could. Knowledge is the one thing that cannot be taken from you at the door. Beneath the high collar of her dress, on a thin cord around her neck, she wore a small gold ring. She had carried it since she was 4 years old. The age she was when she was brought to England. The age she was when a man she did not know wrapped her in a traveling cloak and told her to be silent and not to remove the cord around her neck no matter what happened. She never did, and she never told a soul what it was. Now, Baron Thorne. He is the kind of man who is charming at dinner and cruel before breakfast. In public, he is all warm smiles and generous hospitality. Behind closed doors, he governs his household through a single tool, fear. Not the loud, obvious kind, the quiet kind, the kind that arrives as a soft warning, a raised eyebrow, a reminder of what he could do if he chose to. Watch people like Baron Thorne carefully, because here is the red flag your instincts are trying to show you. A man who performs generosity in public but practices cruelty in private is not a generous man. He is an actor, and actors, when the audience disappears, become dangerous. Carmen knew this. She had known it for years. She stayed quiet. She stayed small. She stayed safe. For now, Baron Thorne calls the household together on a Tuesday morning in October and announces the event of the season, a grand ball, the grandest the estate has hosted in a decade. Every surface is to be polished. Every candelabra is to be checked. New livery is ordered for the footmen. Fresh drapes are hung in the main hall. The Baron moves through the preparations with the energy of a man who is not hosting a party, but building a performance. Because the guest of honor is not an ordinary visitor. His name is Elias, the Duke of Valois, a French nobleman of considerable standing, and a man carrying a mission that 4 European nations are depending on. Elias has been appointed by a coalition of powers to travel to England and locate something that has been lost for over a decade, the long-lost heir of the House of Vauclair. Now pause here, because this is where the history becomes extraordinary. The Duchy of Courland. Most people have never heard of it, but it was real. It existed along the Baltic coast, in what is today the country of Latvia. From the year 1561 all the way to 1795, when it was absorbed by Imperial Russia following a political annexation. The ruling noble families of Courland followed a governance system called the Ritterschaft, a German word meaning knighthood. A council of landed barons who governed alongside the duke in a structure that was part parliament, part aristocratic court. When the political upheaval came and the duchy fell, the noble families scattered. Some fled to Prussia, some to France, and some, particularly those with children young enough to travel without question, were sent to England under false names, under false histories, hidden inside ordinary lives until it was safe to return. This practice had a name in the courts of Europe. It was called mise en charite, a French phrase meaning placed in safety. Carmen was 4 years old when she was placed in safety. She was brought to Bristol, given to a tradesman's family who asked no questions and received a quiet payment for their discretion. When that family's business failed, not tragedy, not death, simply a failed commercial venture that left them unable to maintain their household, Carmen was placed into service. She arrived at Baron Thorne's estate at the age of 14. She has been here for 7 years, and Duke Elias of Valois has been searching for her, without knowing her face, without knowing her name, for 3. Carmen knows none of this. Not yet. She knows only that the silver must be polished by 6, that the east candelabra is leaning, and that cook is in a fury about the venison arriving late. Now, notice something about Baron Thorn in these preparations. He does not ask what Duke Elias needs. He does not inquire about the purpose of the visit. He orders new drapes. He polishes the silver. He performs. This is the second red flag. A man who prepares for people rather than for purpose is a man who understands only the surface of things. And men who live on the surface, when something real arrives, do not know how to handle it. They improvise. And improvisation, for men like Baron Thorn, always reveals exactly who they are. The night of the ball arrives. The guests come in silks and satins. Laughter fills the grand staircase. The ballroom glows with candlelight and the kind of easy confidence that only comes from people who have never once had to wonder where their next meal is coming from. Carmen moves between them like a ghost, carrying trays, straightening tablecloths, adjusting the position of a vase. Invisible by design, invisible by rule. Duke Elias stands apart from the other guests. He is not laughing. He is not performing. He stands near the far window with a glass he has not touched and watches the room the way a man watches a chessboard. Quietly, patiently, looking for the piece that does not quite fit the pattern. He has requested use of the estate's private library to study maps sent ahead by the coalition's envoy. Maps that detail the last known movements of the House of Vauclair before the duchy fell. Baron Thorn granted the request without reading what the maps contained. That was a mistake. Carmen is in the corridor outside the library at 9:30, collecting used glasses from a side table. When she smells it, smoke, not the soft smoke of a dying fireplace, the sharp, fast smoke of something that should not be burning. A lamp has toppled inside the library. The curtains have caught, and within minutes, the corridor between the library and the main staircase is filling, thick and gray and moving fast. In the ballroom, the news arrives like a stone thrown into still water. The ripple of panic spreads instantly. Ladies are guided toward the main doors. Gentlemen shout instructions that contradict each other. The carefully constructed propriety of the evening dissolves in under 60 seconds. Nobody thinks about the Duke in the library. Nobody except Carmen. Because Carmen knows something that not a single lord or lady in that ballroom knows. She knows this house. Every passage, every hidden door, every servant's corridor that runs behind the walls like a second skeleton beneath the plaster and the paint. She knows them because she has cleaned every inch of them. In 7 years, the estate's back passages have become as familiar to her as the lines on her own hands. She does not wait. She does not ask permission. She moves, through the back passage behind the east wall, up the narrow stair, along the corridor that runs parallel to the library. She knows the panel, a servant's access point used for cleaning the fireplace from the east side. She presses her palm flat against the wood. It opens. The room is thick with smoke. She drops low. And there, crouched near the far desk, his coat pressed against his face, is Elias. "This way," she says. No curtsy, no title, no time. He follows, without question, without hesitation, as though some part of him already understands that this is not a moment for the usual rules. She leads him through the narrow passage, down 2 flights, and out through the kitchen courtyard into the cold October air. He coughs, straightens, and then he looks at her, truly looks at her, in a way that almost nobody above stairs has looked at a servant in the entirety of her 7 years at that estate. "Who are you?" he asks. But the chaos behind them is growing louder. Carmen is already turning back toward the servant's entrance, already stepping back into the invisibility that has kept her safe. She does not notice, in the rush, in the dark, in the cold, that the cord around her neck has broken, that the small gold ring has slipped free, that it is lying in the courtyard gravel at the Duke's feet. Elias looks down. He picks it up. He holds it close to the lantern light above the kitchen door, and his expression changes entirely. Now pay attention, because this is the moment the story turns. Baron Thorn arrives in the courtyard within minutes. He surveys everything with the speed of a man whose first instinct is always calculation. He sees the Duke. He sees Carmen standing near the servant's door. And he makes a decision, instantly, smoothly, without a moment of shame. He tells the assembled guests that his household had the matter entirely under control, that it was his staff, acting under his direction, who ensured the Duke's safety. He takes the credit. He does not look at Carmen when he says it. And Carmen, standing 3 feet away, soot on her hands, smoke in her hair, says nothing, because she already knows what comes next. The following morning, before she has eaten, before the kitchen fires are even properly lit, Baron Thorn finds her in the corridor. His voice is quiet. "You will say nothing about last night," he tells her. "Not a word. Not to the Duke. Not to anyone. If you speak, if you say a single thing that contradicts what I have told my guests, I will see to it that you are turned out without a character. You will find no position in any household in London. You will find nothing." And here is the third red flag, the most important one. Baron Thorn does not threaten Carmen with violence. He threatens her with the system, with the written character, the reference letter that every servant in Regency England depended on to find work. Without it, a servant could not be hired. Without it, they were erased from the legitimate world entirely. He is not using his fists. He is using a piece of paper. This is what sophisticated cruelty looks like. It does not announce itself. It does not shout. It simply uses the rules, the very rules that were supposed to protect people, as a weapon. Learn to recognize this. In any era, in any setting, the moment someone uses a system or a structure to silence rather than to govern, that is not authority. That is control dressed up in the language of procedure. Carmen stands in that corridor, and she understands, perhaps for the first time with complete clarity, that the Baron's power is not real power. It is borrowed. It is built entirely on the silence of people like her. And borrowed power, she knows, must eventually be returned. 3 days pass. Duke Elias does not leave. This unsettles Baron Thorn in a way he cannot quite name. He had expected the Duke to thank him, accept his hospitality for one final evening, and depart for the continent with the coalition's business unfinished. That is what men like the Baron expect from situations they believe they have controlled. A clean exit, a grateful nod, and then silence. But Elias does not behave like a man who has been managed. He takes his meals quietly. He walks the gardens in the morning without invitation or company. He asks no questions of the Baron. He makes no requests of the household staff. He simply remains, watching, waiting, holding something close that nobody in the estate can see. The ring. Carmen, meanwhile, goes about her duties. She polishes. She scrubs. She carries. She does not speak of the fire. She does not speak of the courtyard. She does not speak of the cord that is no longer around her neck, the absence of which sits against her collarbone like a cold space she cannot stop noticing. She has made her calculation. Staying silent means staying safe. It means keeping the thin, fragile life she has built inside this house. The candle at night, the newspapers, the quiet accumulation of knowledge that nobody knows she has. It means surviving, but something has shifted inside her. Something that the Baron's quiet threat, delivered in that cold corridor before breakfast, did not extinguish. Something that his borrowed power and his careful cruelty could not quite reach. She thinks about the 7 years, the invisible mornings, the steps she has scrubbed in the rain, the coin dropped in the dirt, the laughter of a man who did not think she was worth an apology. She thinks about the cord around her neck, gone now, the ring in the hands of a man she led through smoke and darkness, a man who looked at her and asked her name. And she makes a different calculation, not out of anger, not out of vengeance, out of something quieter and stronger than either. She decides that she is done being borrowed power for someone else's story. Now, before we move forward, understand something about the choice Carmen is facing. In the world of Regency England, A servant stepping forward to contradict their employer in front of a duke and a room full of aristocracy was not simply bold. It was an act that could end in destitution. The written character, that single reference letter, was the only currency a domestic servant possessed. It was not a courtesy. It was a lifeline. Baron Thorn understood this perfectly. That is why he used it. But here is what he miscalculated. Carmen was not an ordinary servant protecting an ordinary life. She was a woman who had been placed in safety, and who had, without anyone's help or permission, made herself ready for the moment safety was no longer enough. The lesson here is not complicated, but it is important. Sacrifice is not always the dramatic kind. It is not always the kind that arrives with noise and witnesses. Sometimes sacrifice is the 7 quiet years. The candle burned down to nothing, the knowledge gathered from discarded paper. The composure held steady in the face of a copper coin dropped in the dirt. Carmen had been sacrificing, not her comfort, not her pride, but her moment for years. Waiting, preparing, holding herself in reserve for something she did not yet have a name for. That is the hardest kind of sacrifice, the kind with no guarantee. On the morning of the 4th day, Duke Elias sends a message through the estate's head butler. He requires a final assembly of the household. All guests currently residing at the estate, all members of the family, and all domestic staff, every last one of them, to be present in the ballroom by 11 o'clock. Baron Thorn receives this message over his morning coffee. His cup pauses halfway to his lips. He recovers quickly, he always does. By the time he has finished breakfast, he has already formed a plan. He calls his daughter to his study. Miss Cecily Thorne, 19 years old, elegantly dressed, quick-minded, and entirely loyal to her father, sits across the table and listens carefully as the Baron explains what she is to say, and how she is to say it, and what she must do if the Duke asks her anything unexpected. He coaches her through the morning. He is thorough. He is precise. He covers every angle he can think of. He does not cover the one that matters. The ballroom fills at 11. This time there is no music, no laughter, no silks catching the candlelight. The guests stand in quiet clusters, uncertain of the occasion. The household staff lines the far wall. Cooks and footmen and housemaids and laundresses, still in their working clothes, still smelling of the morning's labor. Carmen stands among them, still, her hands folded in front of her apron. Duke Elias enters the room last. He walks to the center of the ballroom floor, the same floor where 3 nights ago the Tun had danced and laughed and looked through every servant in the room. And he stops. He reaches into the inside pocket of his coat. He draws out something small. He holds it up. The ring catches the light. Small, gold, bearing a crest that almost nobody in that room recognizes. Elias speaks. His voice is unhurried. Carrying. 3 nights ago, someone saved my life. They led me through passages I did not know existed, through smoke and darkness, and out to safety. And then they vanished before I could learn their name. They left something behind. He pauses. I will not leave this estate, and I will not conclude the business that 4 nations have sent me here to conduct, until the person who saved me, and the rightful owner of this ring, steps forward. The room is very still. Baron Thorn moves first, smoothly, with the confidence of a man who has rehearsed. He steps forward and gestures toward his daughter with a proud, paternal smile that he has clearly been practicing since breakfast. Miss Cecily Thorne steps into the center of the room. She is dressed magnificently. She holds herself beautifully. She begins to speak with exactly the kind of quiet confidence her father coached into her over 3 hours of careful preparation. Elias listens. He nods politely. He waits until she finishes. Then he asks one question. Just one. Tell me the origin of the crest on this ring. Not its name. Its meaning. What it represents and why. The silence that follows is long. Miss Cecily Thorne is an intelligent young woman. She is composed. She is well educated by the standards of her time and her class. But the House of Vauclair is not an English house. Its history is not in any English book. Its crest, a Baltic crane in full flight above a field of 7 stars, belongs to a duchy that most people in that room have never heard of, and its meaning was passed down not through libraries, but through family, through mothers to daughters, through grandmothers who pointed at the mark and said, "This is who we are. This is what we carry. Do not forget." Cecily Thorne was never told, because Cecily Thorne has no connection to it whatsoever. She looks at her father. Her father looks at the floor. And in the silence, in the long, terrible, beautiful silence of a lie that has finally run out of room, a figure moves at the back of the ballroom, slowly, without hurry, still in her apron, soot from the morning's kitchen fires on her left sleeve, hair pinned plainly, hands rough from stone and soap and 7 years of work that nobody above stairs ever paused to notice. Carmen walks into the center of the ballroom. The room erupts, not in applause, not yet, in the particular sound of the English aristocracy confronting something it cannot immediately categorize. A rush of whispers that sharpens quickly into something harder. Scandal. Outrage. What on earth is the meaning of? A servant, standing where debutantes stand, in the center of the floor, in front of a duke, in front of the ton. Carmen does not hurry. She does not apologize. She does not look at Baron Thorne, whose face has gone the color of old ash. She looks at Elias, and she speaks. The crest is a Baltic crane in full flight above a field of 7 stars. The 7 stars represent the 7 original landed estates of the Duchy of Courland. The crane represents endurance, the belief held by the ruling house that no matter how far they were driven from their land, they would return. The crane was chosen because it is a bird that migrates thousands of miles and always finds its way home. She pauses. My grandmother designed it. Now, here is where history meets this story in a way that should genuinely surprise you. In the courts of the Baltic nobility, a heraldic crest was not decoration. It was a legal document in visual form. The noble houses of Germany and the Baltic states maintained a record called the Wapenroll, a roll of arms that served as the final proof of identity when words failed. Wapenbuch, a German word meaning book of coats of arms. Every detail of every crest was recorded in this register with the same legal precision as a birth certificate or a deed of land. The ability to describe your crest accurately, not just its appearance but its meaning, its history, the intention behind every element, was considered one of the highest forms of proof of noble lineage, because only those raised within the house, taught by family, would know it with that level of detail. A forger could copy the image. Nobody could copy the memory. Now, pause here for a moment. History is filled with these shadows. In the courts of Europe, it was genuinely understood and accepted that royal heirs could be hidden. They could be smuggled across borders in laundry baskets or merchant carts. They could be raised in anonymity inside ordinary lives. The question was never whether it was possible. It was always whether it was provable. Carmen has just proved it. Elias crosses the ballroom floor. He does not rush. His footsteps are the only sound in the room. He takes Carmen's hand. He places the ring on her finger. It fits perfectly. He steps back, straightens, and in the silence of that grand London ballroom, with every lord and lady watching, with Baron Thorne standing motionless beside his daughter, with the household staff still lined against the far wall, Duke Elias of Valois bows. Low, deep, the kind of bow that is not a courtesy, the kind reserved for sovereign blood. His voice carries to every corner of the room. The search is over. Long live the Princess of Vauclair. The room does not move immediately. People need a moment, sometimes, to understand that the world has just rearranged itself around them. That the person they looked through this morning, the person who carried their trays and scrubbed their steps and moved through their hallways like a shadow, was never beneath them, was never beneath anyone in that room, was, in fact, the very person 4 nations had sent a duke across the continent to find. What happens in the days that follow is not what anyone expects. People who have watched stories like this one often expect what comes next to be about revenge. about the settling of scores, about every slight returned with interest, every humiliation answered, every person who dropped a copper coin into the dirt made to feel exactly what that felt like from the other side. That is not what Carmen does. Baron Thorn is brought before a formal inquiry within the week. His manipulation of the rescue narrative, his deliberate theft of Carmen's act of courage, and his attempt to suppress her identity, is laid before the inquiry in careful, documented detail. He is stripped of his honorary appointments. His standing in the tun collapses within a single season, not because Carmen destroys him, because the truth, once it is in the room, does the work itself. Lord Phineas Ashford, the man with the carriage, the puddle, and the copper coin, sends a formal letter of apology to Carmen within a fortnight. It is returned to him, unopened, sealed exactly as he sent it, not from cruelty, not from bitterness, from principle, because Carmen understands something that Lord Ashford clearly does not. An apology sent because you have been exposed is not the same thing as an apology sent because you understand what you did wrong. One is remorse, the other is management, and Carmen knows the difference. Carmen's first formal act is this. She requests, before any discussion of titles or treaties, that every domestic servant currently employed at Baron Thorn's estate be provided with a proper written character and 3 months of fair wages. They had not saved her, but they had not been cruel. And in the world Carmen lived in for 7 years, that quiet, ordinary decency was worth recognizing. She uses the same system that Baron Thorn used to threaten her, the written character, and she turns it around. She does not destroy the weapon. She changes whose hands it is in. That is not revenge. That is justice. And there is a difference. Now, before this story closes, here are the lessons that Carmen's life taught. The first lesson: dignity is not given by rank. It is carried by the person. It survives copper coins dropped in the dirt and mud on a thin dress. The second lesson: the skills you build in silence are never wasted. The newspapers read by candlelight and the passages memorized while cleaning. Preparation does not announce itself. It simply arrives exactly when it is needed. The third lesson: true nobility is not found in titles. It is found in what a person chooses to do with power once they hold it. The fourth lesson: sacrifice is not always dramatic. The hardest form of sacrifice is the daily, quiet, unrecognized kind. The choice to remain composed when the world insists you are nothing. And the fifth lesson, perhaps the most important one: borrowed power always returns to the person it was taken from. Baron Thorn's influence was built on the silence of the people beneath him. The moment one of those people chose to speak, the whole structure came down. If you are being kept small by someone else's borrowed power, remember this. They need your silence to survive. And silence is always a choice. Carmen of Vauclair walked into that ballroom in her apron, with soot on her sleeve and 7 years of invisible labor in her hands. She walked out a princess, not because a duke placed a ring on her finger, because she had never, not once in 7 years, stopped being one. If this story stayed with you, if Carmen's quiet strength reminded you of something in your own life, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories like this one coming. Stories that teach. Stories that stay. You will not want to miss them. Carmen never fought anyone. She never raised her voice. She simply prepared, in silence by candlelight for 7 years, and waited for the room to catch up. The real lesson of this story is not about royalty. It is about patience and quiet sacrifice. In 1815, a servant without a written reference letter could not find work anywhere in England. That single document controlled thousands of lives. Carmen understood the system completely. And when power came to her, she used that same system to protect others. That is what real strength looks like.